interesting questions to ask specifically about the sort of general election run-in. I don't think it's lazy, because I just think sometimes that we might have missed something. I find myself circling very similar territory every day, perhaps inevitably, because you're responding almost to the same news every day. But I wonder whether you've got... So do feel free today to keep an eye on the news agenda and come up with questions that we could ask tomorrow or possibly later today. What is the political phone-in you haven't heard but you would like to hear? Shall I wait? I'll just wait. I'm not going to get any, am I? Nothing yet. Thank you, Anne. Anne writes, rarely I agree with James O'Brien, but he puts his finger on the problem with Mr. Sunak. He comes across as a robot. How can you rarely agree with me? Rarely disagree with me, Anne? I've been right about almost everything for the last 8 years. Good Lord. I want to know why, listening to Rishi Sunak, and I don't know whether you heard the interview with him today, with Nick, or whether or not you've just sort of formed an opinion of him from other encounters, other interviews, other appearances. Maureen hasn't. Maureen's been in touch to say, what a stupid question. How can any of your listeners know the character of Mr. Sunak when they have never met him? Well, that really just closes off almost every phone-in topic that we could do in the run-up to the general election. You've never met me either, Maureen, but I bet you have a strong opinion about... You see, you have met Rishi Sunak. That's the whole point of election campaigns. They are opportunities to meet the people. That's certainly the whole point of Starmer and Sunak coming into this studio to answer Nick's questions. It is an opportunity to meet the people. And I don't think I've ever met him, actually, in terms of face-to-face. I've met Starmer, but not Sunak. So I found myself listening today, and I've watched him quite closely as well at PMQs and in other encounters, other contexts. And I can't quite pinpoint what his problem is. I can't quite see what's wrong with him. I just want to say for the record, I'm categorically not flirting with the idea of feeling sorry for him anymore. And I also want to probably spear quite early the Suella Braverman observation. The decision to reappoint Suella Braverman to the Home Office was the point at which any hopes of Rishi Sunak proving to be made of slightly better stuff than either of his predecessors disappeared immediately. I get that, and I kind of agree a bit as well, but I don't know how helpful it is to keep circling that territory. But if you were to assemble a politician from algorithms, or you to get a computer program, to be a conservative leader, you could do a lot worse than this fella on paper, couldn't you? He's made a ton of money and he's married well. I mean, they were once great conservative achievements. They were great conservative values. He's from an ethnic minority, so the modern nature of the United Kingdom could have been reflected by his success. It's odd that he has sort of almost seemed at times to be chasing the white supremacist vote, but nonetheless, he represents a great example of the benefits and the power of the kind of immigration that much of his party seems diametrically opposed to these days. He's from an NHS family. His dad was a GP. I mean, all of these things on paper. He went into the city, so I bet he'd be a good chancellor. He's quite well turned out. He obviously takes a little bit of time over his appearance, unlike some Conservative prime ministers of recent years that we could mention. So what is it? What is it about him? Why has it all gone so wrong for Rishi Sunak? Because the more I think about this, the more I do wonder whether he is actually being punished for what went before more than he is being punished for what has happened on his watch. I mean, if you had to pick one thing that he could have done differently, and I'm not letting you have Braverman anymore, that's too obvious. One thing that he could have done differently, what would that thing have been? What would have happened if he'd abandoned the ludicrous Rwanda plan the minute that the Supreme Court said that it was not compatible with UK law. Because that, for me, is the moment where he lost the plot. He may not have lost the room, or at least the room that he cared most about, but that is the moment when he lost the plot, because that is when he had to start talking gibberish about foreign courts and making it sound like Brexit Mark II, when in fact what he should have done as a Conservative Prime Minister is say, look, I was keen on this policy. I mean, that would be a lie because we know that he wasn't. But he could simply have said, I understand why some people were keen on this policy, but it is in defiance of UK law, and I will not be, no Conservative Prime Minister should ever treat the rule of law with contempt, which is a nice little dig at Boris Johnson. And in fact, he could say no Conservative Prime Minister should ever treat reality with contempt, which would be a nice little dig at Liz Truss. And yet it seems to me that the Rwanda plan is all he's got left now. It seems to me that is pretty much all he's got left. And that's designed to stop support hemorrhaging further to the right, to the party which, for reasons that we may explore later this week, continues to attract Hitler fans, Nazi sympathisers and fascists on an extraordinary scale. So he's trying to stop support hemorrhaging further to the right. But the problem with using immigration in that way is that the fella further to the right will always go further than you. So even if you did start deporting people on an epic scale, the fella further to the right than you would start calling for immigrants to be executed or made to wear bibs as they walk up and down the road that identify them as people who weren't born here or who can't trace their families back to the Doomsday Book. The rhetoric of racism will always trump reality. So maybe that's what it is. Maybe there's a sense, and I don't know whether this will come out as sympathy for Rishi Sunak or really, really sharp criticism, really hard criticism. Is it the thing that gets your goat most about him is what I'm looking for today. All right, 0345 6060 because I think I've just worked out what it is for me. Have you? Listening to this bilge, have you worked out what penny is actually in the process of dropping while I speak? I think, Nikos has. Well, Nikos has sort of got there. I think so I'm trying to articulate a sense of almost discombobulation, more than discomfort, a sense that when I watch him, there's an inauthenticity that I haven't been able to quite pin down. What is it? What is wrong with him? Question. Answer. I don't believe him. And I don't mean I don't believe him when he claims that he's brought inflation down a couple of years after claiming that it had gone up because of world events and things beyond his control. It's not that I don't believe him when he says, I think I'm going to win. I don't mean traditional don't believe a politician territory. I think with Rwanda in particular and immigration in general, I don't think he means it. This is it, isn't it? Because this, of course, if we are all recognising this on a subliminal level, if on the subconscious, when he talks about immigration and deporting people in ways that are designed to assuage voters even further to the right than the Conservative Party is, then some people are going to just see his ethnicity and not believe him. People on the right, well, racists, are going to see the colour of his skin and not believe that he wants to get rid of asylum seekers as much as they do. But then other people who couldn't give two hoots about the colour of his skin, they don't believe intellectually or emotionally that he has the same nativist urges as the people whose votes he's trying to win. So if you asked me, if this was your show, and you were asking me to ring in and say, what is it about him that just doesn't feel right? I would say, I don't think he believes in his biggest policies. I think this is government by focus group. What have you got to do to stop hemorrhaging support to the right and minimise your losses a fortnight tomorrow? You've got to convince those people who hate immigration and hate immigrants. You've got to convince them that you feel like they do. And he's failing on both fronts because people who do hate immigration don't believe him, and people who don't hate immigration don't believe him either, which makes him inauthentic. So even a moderate Conservative is going to struggle to vote for Rishi Sunak because they think that he's lying about how much he wants to deport people to Rwanda. And then, of course, we have the little reminders that both Rishi Sunak and James Cleverly, who's now in charge nominally of the deportation policy, reportedly derided it in private. And the other thing about him, it's inauthenticity is what we're nudging towards. The other thing about him is that I don't think he's centre-right. I've noticed Farage using the phrase centre-right lately. Have you noticed? They're not centre-right. Centre-right is Ken Clarke. Centre-right is sort of Philip Hammond and Theresa May, although her period in the Home Office probably flirted with slightly further right. There's nothing centre-right about wanting to deport genuine asylum seekers fleeing war and famine. But that little bit there, what is it about him that just doesn't quite ring true? I think that might be it. What do you think? 0345 6060 973. So loads of questions, some of which I can remember, some of which I can't. A general sense, with 2 weeks tomorrow to go, that we are having a little bit of a roundup. It's not a pylon, John. John says another Sunak pylon. What a surprise! It's not a pylon, mate, because no one's spoken yet except me. But and also, obviously, people are welcome to ring in and say, I don't think there is anything wrong with him. I think he's brilliant. In which case, the question becomes, why is it all going so badly for him poll-wise then? And that's when we come back to the beginning. And the beginning was, how much of this is on him? How much is him, and how much is inheritance? How much is of his plight is a consequence of what went before, the 14 years that went before, and how much of his plight in the context specifically of the polling, how much of it is on him? So, I mean, come at this from whatever angle you please, but it all leads to that final question, doesn't it? How much of this is on Rishi Sunak, and how much of it is down to what went before? In the interest of balance, after John's slightly rude contribution, David's been in touch to say this analysis is so good. There's a PhD in this for someone. I think there is, actually. And it's certainly not one I could do. I haven't got the brains. But the idea of not convincing the nativist snarlers that you are one of them, while simultaneously not convincing people who look at stories like Rishi Sunak's families and feel a warm glow of satisfaction at the success, the historical and continuing success of mass immigration. Those of us who feel that way don't believe that he hates it. So he's kind of damned if he does and damned if he doesn't.